let me tell you something no one warns you about. The specific feeling of discovering that your entire life was a controlled experiment. It is not the rage that arrives first. It is not the grief, though grief is coming. Patient, unhurried, certain of its appointment. What arrives first is something far quieter and far more total. A stillness, the kind that descends when the last wall of a structure you spent your whole life building comes down, and you are left standing in the open air of your own story for the first time, with nothing between you and the truth of it. I had survived Kandahar. I had carried 7 names against my chest every day for 15 years, names of men I had buried in the official record as casualties and buried again, privately, every morning when I put on the medallion that carried them, and I had constructed an identity out of that survival, out of that loss. I had told myself that I endured because I was strong enough, because I was trained enough, because on the night everything went wrong in that mountain mine, I had made better decisions than the men beside me. Standing in a laboratory, 10,000 years below the world that had raised me, looking at my own face on a body that had been cultivated before my parents were old enough to make a decision of their own, I finally understood the truth that had been underneath all of it, waiting with the patience of something that knew it would eventually be found. I had not survived Kandahar because I was strong. I had survived because surviving was what I had been built to do. Because someone, somewhere, and in an office with no name on the door and no record in any file that would survive declassification, had looked at the equations and decided that I was the variable worth keeping. The question, the only question that had ever actually belonged to me, was what I chose to do with that. I was still finding the answer when the soldiers came through the wall. The body in the tank had my face, my jaw. The scar along my left forearm from a training accident I was told would fade. My hands, the same hands that had dragged survivors from burning vehicles across 3 continents, suspended now in blue liquid behind glass, perfectly still, belonging to a man who had never once been permitted to use them. I had spent 42 years believing I was the only version of myself that had ever existed. I was the 7th. And somewhere in the architecture of that single fact, every story I had ever told about who I was collapsed into dust. We must go back to before the laboratory. Back to the hour this episode truly began. In a sealed chamber deep in Uldara, with a serpent queen blocking the only exit and a black crystal rotating above her open palm, showing Marcus Reeves things he could never unfind. Vareth had not moved from the doorway. She stood between him and every possible exit, the way a mountain stands between valleys. Not as a threat, simply as a fact of the landscape. Her tail made slow, deliberate contact with the stone floor. Not aggressive. Absolute. The movement of something that has governed a city for 10,000 years and has long since stopped distinguishing between authority and gravity. Both simply being forces that do not require announcement. The black crystal turned above her palm. The images it carried were not projections, and they were live transmissions from the world above. A crater 2 kilometers wide where a city called Denver had stood 48 hours ago. A skyscraper split cleanly down its full height, its steel skeleton peeling back like bark from a struck tree. Streets running with blue flame that moved against the wind. Indifferent to the physics of fire, answering to a different set of rules entirely. Smoke rising from a wound in the earth so deep, it had no floor that any satellite image had yet located. 500 dead every minute, Vareth said. And it keeps rising. Marcus looked at the crystal, then at her. He had spent 15 years in rooms with people who were very skilled at performing certainty they did not entirely feel. And what he read in Vireth's face was not performance. The numbers she was reciting were not leverage, or they were inventory. She was not threatening him with what she could do. She was informing him of what had already begun. New York carries 3 dormant fragments, she continued. London, 5. Tokyo, 7. The medallion against his chest had been burning since the images started. Not physically, or not only physically, but in the way that something burns when it recognizes what it is looking at. As if the metal forged from azurite ore in a Kandahar mine 15 years ago had its own memory of this substance, its own response to seeing what concentrated azurite does when it is finally, deliberately released. He filed that away, focused on the only question that mattered inside this room right now. "What do you want from me?" he said. Vireth studied him the way she always studied him. Not as an obstacle to be managed, but as a calculation she had completed long before this conversation began, and was now simply watching arrive at its predetermined conclusion. "Your knowledge," she said. "Your access to the surface world's geological records, its mining surveys, its buried infrastructure. Help us locate what remains of the azurite deposits above. Help us survive, and your world survives intact alongside us. Every dormant fragment stays dormant. Every city carries its fragment the way it has always carried it, unknowingly, safely, forever." "And if I refuse?" Marcus said. Her tail struck the floor once. Not hard, not theatrical. The sound of a door closing. "Then we activate what we have," she said. "Not as a threat, Marcus, as a consequence. We are a civilization with 2 generations of life remaining. We have moved past the point where threats are necessary. What I am offering you is not a negotiation. It is a description of the 2 futures that currently exist." She said it the way a doctor delivers a diagnosis that will not change regardless of how the patient receives it. With care, with precision, with the complete, unhurried steadiness of someone who has already made their peace with every word before speaking it. "I don't have a choice," Marcus said. He said it the way you say something when you need to hear its shape out loud before you can accept it. "There are always choices," she said. "Some simply carry consequences, the others do not." She turned away from him then. A small, deliberate movement that said, "The conversation is complete," and the answer was never in doubt. And that was the detail that unsettled him most. Not the images in the crystal, not the numbers, not even the threat. The fact that she had known what he would say before he said it. She had known before he did. Then the ground shook, and Uldara remembered that Marcus Reeves was not the only one who had been following its trail. The alarm moved through Uldara's tunnel walls the way a warning moves through bone. Not carried by air, transmitted directly through structure. Resonant, ancient. A sound the city had not made in a very long time, and which every Naga who heard it understood immediately. Vireth's scales shifted before she spoke. The blue-gray of her resting state deepened and darkened. The color of water at depth before a storm. The color of a decision already made and now simply arriving at its execution. "Intruders," she said. "Human. Military. Eastern entrance." "How?" Marcus said. "No one above knows this place exists." She looked at him. A single level look that held the weight of an answer she had not yet chosen to give. And in that look, something moved in Marcus's chest that was not quite fear and not quite understanding, but was the specific sensation that lives exactly between the two. The feeling of a truth approaching that you are not yet ready to receive. They came in through the Eastern Passage in a formation that told Marcus everything he needed to know about the quality of their intelligence. They were not searching. They were arriving. moving through a space they had studied from outside for long enough that the interior held no surprises. Every soldier placed in exactly the position that the room's geometry required, as if the floor had been pre-marked during a rehearsal Marcus had not been invited to. No unit insignia, no national designation, nothing that would survive the light of an oversight committee or the questions of a journalist with the right clearance level and the wrong assumptions about what their government was capable of. A man led them, older, the kind of face that had received enough from the world to have stopped being surprised by any of it. A scar running the full length of his jaw, old enough to have settled into the face, to have become part of its architecture rather than a mark upon it. He spoke into a communicator on his wrist without breaking his stride. His voice the voice of someone who has given this particular order in rehearsal enough times that the real version feels simply like the latest repetition. Eastern entrance confirmed, he said. All teams proceed under Operation Obsidian. Kandahar's subject is somewhere in this structure. The Queen is a secondary asset, expendable if she becomes a problem. Find them both. Move. They opened fire on the Naga guards before the final word reached the air. The rounds glowed purple on impact, something the ammunition itself was doing to Naga biology, something that had been engineered for exactly this engagement, in exactly this environment, against exactly this physiology. The guards fell and did not rise. Marcus watched from the corridor where Virith had pulled him the moment the alarm sounded. He watched his city, the city that had been his home for less than 24 hours, the city that had shown him things about the world and about himself that no surface institution had ever been equipped to show him. Being systematically dismantled by people who moved through it as if they had always known the way. And a feeling arrived that he recognized with the sharp, specific discomfort of an old acquaintance showing up uninvited. The particular anger that belongs to the moment you understand, with full and final clarity, that you have been used. That a hand you believed was resting on your shoulder had in fact been steering you the entire time. Kandahar's subject, the scarred man had said. Not soldier, not operative, not Marcus Reeves, 15 years special forces, 12 years geological field work, a man with a history and a name, and 7 names he carried as his own grief. Subject, something that had been filed under a project designation, something that had a number where other people had identities. Virith pulled him deeper into Uldara. And in the room she brought him to, the screens on the walls showed him exactly how long the hunters had been watching, and exactly who had shown them the way. The circular room sealed behind them without sound or visible mechanism. Inside it, crystal screens floated at eye level, a dozen of them, each one showing a different section of Uldara. Corridors breached, guards fallen, the eastern tunnels fully compromised, the formation moving steadily inward with the methodical patience of people who know precisely where they are going. That detail, the certainty of their movement, the absence of any hesitation, the way they navigated a city that should have been unknowable to them, sat in Marcus's chest like something cold and very dense, and did not move. Who are they? He said. Project Obsidian, Virith said. A faction inside your government that has operated without oversight, without record, without any restriction that a civilian authority would recognize, since the year your country first divided the atom. They did not find us through investigation. They have known about us since 1947, not suspected, not theorized, not inferred, known. And they have spent every year since studying what they could reach of our technology and preparing, with great patience and considerable thoroughness, for the day they could reach the rest. She moved her hands through the floating symbols and drew a specific screen forward. The The footage on it stopped Marcus's breathing before his mind had fully processed what he was seeing. Kandahar, his mission, his team moving in single file through the entrance of the mountain mine, following a briefing that had described uranium stockpiles and a threat to regional stability. He watched himself walk through a door he remembered from the inside, and felt, with a force that had nothing intellectual about it, the particular horror of seeing your own memory from outside, of understanding that the story you were told about a night that changed everything was not the story that was actually happening. They sent you there deliberately, Vareth said. Not for any objective the mission file described. They sent you there for you. To expose you to concentrated azurite in a real-world environment and measure what your body did with it. To confirm, with field data rather than laboratory projection, whether the design held under genuine conditions. Marcus kept his eyes on the screen. On his team. On 7 men he had spent 15 years carrying. My team, he said. The words came out very controlled. The effort behind that control was significant and invisible. Vareth held his gaze, and he saw in her face something he had not seen from her before. Not guilt, because guilt belongs to those who believed they had a choice and chose badly. Something older and heavier. The specific weight carried by a being who has held someone else's pain in trust for a long time and is now, at last, returning it to its owner. They were the lower boundary, she said. The point at which the exposure failed, and the body could not survive what it was given. You were the upper boundary, the point at which it succeeded. Every man you lost that night told the people who sent you there something precise about where the threshold was and how much further they needed to push the design to move it. Each death was a data point. Each one narrowed the margin between what failed and what you became. The screens continued their quiet, patient inventory of Uldara falling. Marcus had worn 7 names against his chest for 15 years. He had told himself he wore them because survivors carry the dead. Because grief held openly is the only honest grief. Because there is a debt you owe to the people who did not walk out of something you walked out of. And wearing their names was the only currency he had to pay it with. He understood now that he had been wearing them as laboratory results, as measurements in a file he had never been permitted to open. Why? He said. The word was smaller than he intended. It came out with the specific smallness of a question that already knows the answer is not going to be sufficient. She moved to another screen. His military file expanded across its full width. DNA mapping, genetic sequencing, markers circled and annotated in language that sat halfway between English and something older, something that had no alphabet available in any library on the surface. Because of what you are, she said. Not who, what. You are the result of a selective program that began before your parents were born. Generations of careful, quiet, patient genetic architecture built toward a single outcome. A body that could absorb azurite without dying. That could interface with Naga biology without rejection. That could pass through both worlds as though it belonged to each of them, because it had been built from both of them. They needed a bridge, Marcus. Something that looked exactly like a man and functioned like something neither fully human nor fully Naga. So they built one, deliberately, over decades. Without your knowledge, without your consent, without the knowledge or consent of anyone in the line that produced you. She paused. Let the silence do its work. And then they planted you in Kandahar, she said, and watched to see if what they had built held together under genuine pressure. It held. Marcus sat down on the floor. Not a decision. His legs made it without consulting the rest of him. the way the body sometimes responds to things the mind has not yet finished receiving, by simply removing itself from the requirement to stand upright. He had spent 42 years believing he was the author of his own life, that the man he had become was a man he had assembled, choice by choice, through discipline and loss and the particular kind of character that only forms when it is built under genuine pressure. He had been quietly, privately proud of that man, in the way that people who have come through hard things allow themselves a careful, earned pride that they do not speak about, because speaking about it would somehow make it less true. That pride had just been shown to him from the other side of the glass, and it looked entirely different from there. "We need to move," Vereth said quietly. And Marcus stood and followed her, because there was nothing left to do with what he was carrying except take it with him into whatever came next. The door was not visible until Vereth placed her hand against the wall in a particular way. It opened without sound, without resistance, the way things open when they have been waiting for the right hand for a very long time. The laboratory beyond was the size of a cathedral and lit by azurite light concentrated into something deliberate and architectural. The technology it contained had no reference point in anything Marcus had been trained or cleared or briefed to understand. It existed in a category that implied its designers had been working with principles that surface physics had not yet formally acknowledged. Along every wall, from floor to the full height of the space, the tanks, cylindrical, blue-lit, bodies suspended inside in perfect, permanent stillness, some entirely human in their architecture, some entirely Naga, some occupying the territory between the two that the human eye registers as wrong before the mind can articulate the specific nature of the wrongness. The specific unease of something built correctly for conditions the observer has no framework for. Marcus stood in the entrance and did not move. "What is this place?" he said. Vereth crossed to the center of the room without answering. She stopped before a single tank, slightly larger than the rest, the glass carrying a faint amber tint at its edges that spoke of age, of time compressed into something visible. The body inside it was a man, a scar along the left forearm, hands that Marcus had looked at on his own wrists every morning for 42 years. The air left his body completely and did not immediately return. "This is your origin," Vereth said. "The genetic template? No, the first design, from which every subsequent version was drawn. You are looking at the blueprint of what you are, preserved here since before you were born, before the program that produced you had yet determined which iteration would be the one that held." "I am looking at myself," Marcus said. The sentence made no grammatical sense, and he said it anyway, because he needed to hear the shape of his own incomprehension spoken aloud before he could begin to move through it. "You are the seventh iteration," she said. "The first 6 did not survive the integration. The azurite collapsed their systems at different stages. Some early, before the process had achieved momentum. Some in the final phase, close enough to completion that the failure had the particular cruelty of proximity. Each one taught the program something specific about where the threshold was and how to move it further. You were constructed from the accumulated knowledge of 6 deaths." She said it without flinching, because she was 10,000 years old and had long since understood that truth does not become kinder when it is softened. It only becomes less honest. 6 men, Marcus said. 6 versions of me. They died in these tanks, and no one carried their names. No one gave them names, she said. The room held that sentence for a long moment. Marcus looked at the tank and did not look away. Long enough for the sound of approaching gunfire to register as ambient information rather than immediate threat. Because what was in front of him was demanding more of his attention than anything behind him. He was grieving something he did not have a name for yet. Not the loss of his own story. There would be time for that. And the time was going to cost something significant. He was grieving the 6 men who had existed in this room and in rooms like it and had never once walked out into open air and made a single choice that was entirely their own, who had been born into an experiment and died inside it, without the experiment pausing to acknowledge them as anything more than failed iterations of a design that was still being refined. Vereth drove her fist through the central tank. The glass gave cleanly, not shattering, splitting, and the blue liquid flooded the floor around their feet, warm and luminescent. And the body inside descended slowly with the quiet dignity of something that had been waiting a very long time for this particular permission. Marcus watched it, felt the weight of a grief that had no existing vocabulary. The grief of a man mourning versions of himself that never lived long enough to have anything to mourn. Then he followed her, because there was nothing else to do with that feeling except carry it forward and see what it became on the other side of whatever came next. The elevator descended past every floor that Uldara had mapped and kept descending. The temperature climbed. The air thickened into something metallic and ancient. The taste of time compressed long enough to develop a texture, the way the deepest strata of the earth taste when they have been sealed long enough to become their own atmosphere. The doors opened onto the cavern that existed below Uldara, the way a heart exists below the ribs, necessary, central, the thing that all other structures had been built around and above in order to protect. A crystal the height of a building stood at its center. Pulsing with a light so steady and so slow, it felt less like illumination and more like the evidence of breathing. The visible sign of something alive at a scale that made the word alive feel insufficient. Every azurite vein Marcus had seen threading through the walls and floors and columns of Uldara led here. Every blue line in every corridor converged on this single point, the way all rivers, followed far enough, lead to the same water. This was not a deposit. This was the origin, the last pure azurite remaining anywhere on Earth. Vereth knelt when she saw it. Briefly, almost involuntarily. The specific reverence that bypasses decision and comes directly from something older than decision. When she rose, her face carried a grief that Marcus recognized now with more precision than he had before. The grief of a sovereign standing before the last thing her civilization needs to survive, and knowing, with the unhurried mathematical precision of 10,000 years, exactly how much time is left. Marcus moved toward it before he chose to. Something in the medallion against his chest, in the metal forged from azurite ore in a Kandahar mine 15 years ago, the metal that had been pressed against his skin every day since, recognized what it was approaching and moved toward it with the certainty of return, of a thing finding its way back to what it was made from. He felt the cavern the way you feel a place you have been to in a dream, known in the bones before the mind can explain the knowing. In 6 other lives, versions of him had stood in this space and not survived what came after. He felt their weight at his back. 6 quiet presences, pressing gently forward. "Why are you showing me this?" he said. His voice had descended to something close to honest, closer than he usually permitted himself. "Because you are the only one who can protect it," she said. "Not as a duty assigned to you, as a fact of your construction. Your blood was engineered to interface with azurite at a depth that no other living thing can replicate. You are the lock and the key simultaneously. The bridge between the world above that needs to be warned and the world below that needs to be saved." She looked at him with the full, unhurried depth of 10 millennia of experience concentrated into a single gaze. "You were created to destroy us," she said. I have always known that. But you were built with everything required to save us instead. Both possibilities have lived in you since before your birth. The only thing that has ever genuinely belonged to you, the only thing in your entire history that was never decided by someone else, is which one you become. The cavern shook. Dust fell in slow, deliberate curtains from the ceiling above. "They are here," she said. And the last and deepest city on earth drew one long, slow breath and held it. They entered the cavern in a configuration that told Marcus everything he needed to know about the quality of their intelligence. They were not searching. They were arriving. Moving through a space they had studied from outside for long enough that the interior held no surprises. Every soldier placed in exactly the position the room's geometry required, as if they had rehearsed this specific entry in a replica facility, which Marcus now understood was exactly what had happened. The scarred man led. He carried a tracking device in his right hand, its red light blinking at the precise interval of a heartbeat. And the moment he crossed the threshold, his eyes moved directly to Marcus's position with the calm, practiced ease of someone confirming a coordinate they already possessed. "Kandahar subject confirmed," he said into his wrist communicator. "In proximity to primary target. All teams hold on my signal. Subject extracted alive. The Queen's value is informational. If she becomes a problem, solve it. Proceed." A soldier behind him raised a launcher and loaded a pressurized canister that glowed at both ends with contained energy. "EMP charge ready, sir. Full cavern radius on your order. Stand by." The scarred man crossed the cavern floor with the unhurried confidence of someone walking through a situation he designed. He stopped 3 meters from Marcus and removed his helmet. The face underneath it reached into Marcus's memory and found something that had been filed there 15 years ago, under conditions he had never fully understood. In the final minutes before a Kandahar mine went catastrophically wrong, he had registered the man then as a senior intelligence observer. The kind of presence that appears at significant operations without explanation and disappears the same way, leaving nothing in the record that would explain why they were there or who sent them. He understood now why there had been no explanation. Because the explanation was the operation. "Hello, Marcus," the colonel said. The voice was exactly as memory had preserved it, measured, unhurried, carrying the quality of a man who has examined every decision in his history and found each one to his own complete satisfaction. Justified. Or Specimen 7, if you prefer the designation in the file. Marcus said nothing for a moment. He was taking the full measure of what stood before him. Not the tactical situation, not the threat, not the rank. The man. The specific human being who had drawn the blueprint of Marcus's life, placed him in the conditions that would test it, and stood back at a carefully maintained distance to observe what the blueprint produced. "You were in Kandahar," Marcus said. "Supervising," the colonel said. "Your field test." He said it without apology, without defensiveness, in the level tone of someone describing a procedure that achieved its intended result. "You performed beyond every projection. You found the Azurite. You found the Queen. You established sufficient trust to be brought inside Aldara, something no previous iteration came remotely close to achieving." He paused. "You did everything you were designed to do, Marcus, without ever once being told that was what you were doing. That is a genuinely remarkable result. I want you to know I mean that sincerely." "My team," Marcus said. 2 words. Controlled to a degree that cost something significant and showed none of it on the surface. "Necessary calibration," the colonel said. We needed real-world threshold data that controlled laboratory conditions cannot produce. The men in your unit gave us the lower range. You gave us the ceiling. Without that data, the design that produced you would have remained theoretical, too uncertain to commit resources to at the scale this program required. He said it the way a surgeon discusses a procedure, not without care, but with the absolute moral architecture of someone who decided long ago that the scale of what they were preventing made the scale of what they did to prevent it not merely acceptable, but necessary. Marcus looked at him for a long time and understood, with the settling certainty that comes when the final piece of a very large structure finds its place, that this man was not a monster. That was the precise thing that made him most dangerous. He was a man who had looked at an existential mathematics and decided, with full deliberation, that ordinary moral frameworks were a luxury the scale of the problem could not afford. And he had lived so completely inside that decision for so long that it had stopped feeling like a decision. It felt like the shape of reality itself. Men who have arrived at that place do not negotiate. They do not reconsider. They have already had every conversation about whether they are right. And they emerged from every one of those conversations entirely satisfied that they are. "What is coming?" Marcus said, like the question underneath every other question. The colonel turned to the crystal. When he turned back, something moved briefly in his face, quickly, the way weather moves across open ground before the next system arrives. Underneath the calcified certainty, underneath the architecture of a man who had made his peace with everything. Something that, in another man, Marcus would have named without hesitation as fear. "The Naga are not the oldest thing in this geology," he said. "They came underground 10,000 years ago and found it already occupied by something that had been here long enough to become indistinguishable from the rock itself. Something dormant, something that has been feeding very slowly and very patiently on the azurite that the Naga built their entire civilization around. That is why the veins are depleting. Not natural depletion, consumption. Something below the Naga has been eating their world from beneath, and it is nearly finished." He held Marcus's gaze with the complete, exhausted seriousness of a man watching something he spent decades preparing for arrive on a schedule he did not control. "When it surfaces," he said, "everything that currently constitutes a crisis for this planet will become context. We have run every model. We have tested every conventional and unconventional response available to us. The only thing that has worked in any scenario, against any projection of what the ancients are capable of, is a hybrid. Something that can operate in both environments. Something that carries human cognition, the tactical capacity, the decision-making under pressure, on the ability to function when pure instinct becomes noise, and Naga biology simultaneously. Something that can go where neither species can go alone." He nodded toward Marcus. "You," he said. "You are the only response we have that the models give any real probability of success." He signaled his team without shifting his gaze. "Take the crystal. Prepare the subject for extraction." Virith moved the instant the order left his mouth. 3 soldiers intercepted her before she had covered half the distance. Equipment purpose-built for Naga biology, training specific to this engagement. She fought with the full force of 10,000 years of physical evolution and the specific, terrible fury of a sovereign watching her city fall and her last possibility be led away in restraints. It was not enough, and they had been preparing for her for a very long time. She looked at Marcus from the ground. Not with anger. He could have handled anger, could have filed it and moved on. She looked at him with the expression of someone who trusted a dangerous calculation and is watching that trust confirm itself as a mistake in real time and cannot yet locate where the error was. He wanted to tell her that the error was not in her reading of him, that he had not known, that there were rooms inside himself he had discovered for the first time tonight. The gas reached him before the words did. Green, low and slow, moving across the cavern floor with the patient, engineered certainty of something built for exactly this space, exactly this biology, exactly this moment in a plan that had been in motion since before Marcus Reeves was born. And the last thing he saw before the dark was Vereth's eyes. Ancient, betrayed, still watching him even as everything else closed. And then the last city below the earth went silent. And Marcus Reeves woke up somewhere cold and bright, on a table that had been waiting for him since the beginning. Cold metal, surgical light, the sound of machines building a file on a body that was no longer entirely the one they had started with. Marcus was on a table, wrists locked, ankles secured. The ceiling above him was the particular institutional white of places designed to make the person inside them feel like a subject rather than a human being, which, as it turned out, was not an accident of interior design, but a statement of precise, categorical fact. The medallion was no longer resting against his sternum, or rather, it was there, but it had completed a process that must have begun the moment the concentrated azurite in the cavern reached it at full proximity. The metal had not fused with his skin. It had become his skin, threaded into the bone itself, integrated at a depth that imaging equipment would later describe as molecular, glowing a slow and steady blue through his chest with every heartbeat, as regular and as permanent as the heartbeat itself. Not a medallion anymore, a component, the final piece of an architecture that had been under construction for 42 years, placed into position while he was unconscious, completing itself without his consent, exactly as every other part of his design had been completed without his consent. The colonel stood behind reinforced glass on the far side of the room, watching, with the focused, quiet attention of a man who has invested a very long time in a project and is now, at last, reviewing what that investment produced. "There you are," he said. His voice came through ceiling speakers, level as always. "Welcome back, 7. "Where am I?" Marcus said. "Area 51, the colonel said. "The greatest institutional misdirection in the history of classified programs. We constructed the joke deliberately. Nothing survives public ridicule, not even the truth. The facility that the world spent half a century laughing at is the facility we built everything important inside of. Where is Vereth?" He pressed a panel on the console beside him. A screen came alive on the wall. Vereth in a containment cell, upright, alive, cables connecting her body to monitoring equipment Marcus could not identify from this distance. Alive. Diminished in a way that was physically difficult to look at directly. Like something built for open ocean, confined to a tank that was technically sufficient in dimension and entirely insufficient in every other sense. "Contained," the colonel said. "Comfortable within the parameters of her biology. She is the most significant source of Naga intelligence and subsurface geological knowledge this program has ever accessed. She will be maintained accordingly." Marcus looked at the screen, then looked deliberately away, because looking was producing something in his chest that he could not afford to act on while he was still restrained to a table. "What do you want from me?" he said. The colonel addressed the technician at the far console without moving from the glass. "I want to see the full range," he said. "I want to understand what a complete integration produces. I want to know precisely what we built." The blue liquid entered Marcus's bloodstream through tubes he had not felt being inserted. which told him, with the precise and automatic information extraction of a man trained to read every available detail, exactly how long he had been unconscious and how much of this procedure had been prepared during that time. What followed was not pain in any sense that the word had previously applied to his experience of the world. Pain implies a thing that arrives and eventually stops. What moved through him when the azurite saturated compound reached his blood was more fundamental than pain. It was revision, his skeleton reconsidering the specifications it had been built to, his musculature rewriting its own fiber, his senses expanding past every boundary they had operated within for 42 years. Like a room that has always contained walls much further back than the ones you have been living between. And someone has finally, permanently, removed the partition between them. He heard himself make sounds he could not have predicted or recognized. Sounds from a body he was only partially still in possession of. From a version of himself that was assembling out of the wreckage of the previous one, and had not yet learned to be quiet about the process. And then, stillness. Not the absence of pain, but the arrival of something new. Something with no name yet. Because it had not existed before this moment, and the language that would eventually describe it had not yet been written. Marcus looked at his hands. Blue-green scales, precise and close, following the geometry of every bone beneath them and the way topography follows the landscape it belongs to. The fingers ending in something curved and sharp that caught the surgical light above and did something with it that light had not done in that room before. Not reflecting, not refracting, but a third thing between the two that suggested these new surfaces operated by rules fractionally different from the ones that governed the world they had emerged into. He opened and closed them, felt the new musculature, not stronger in the simple sense, but differently capable, built for a different set of demands. He felt the information arriving through touch now, temperature, density, composition, the molecular character of every surface, with a clarity that made his previous 42 years of sensation feel like an approximation. Like he had spent his entire life reading the world through glass, and someone had finally removed it. He felt the azurite in his blood, not as a compound, as blood. As if it had always been there and the rest of him had spent 4 decades becoming ready to acknowledge it. Complete, the colonel said quietly, from behind his glass. The integration is complete. He released the restraints. Marcus stood and felt the floor differently under feet that had arrived at a new understanding with the ground that they were standing on. As if gravity and he had reached a renegotiated arrangement, a new compact, and the planet had quietly acknowledged the revised terms. "What have you done to me?" Marcus said. The voice that came out was his. Same cadence, same accent, same deep patterns of speech. But built now on a foundation half a register lower. The way a familiar piece of music sounds when it is played in a room large enough to contain it properly for the first time. "Finished what was started before you were born," the colonel said. He moved to a second screen. What it displayed stopped Marcus in a way that the transformation itself had not. Because the transformation, however total, had at least been composed of things with biological categories. What moved across this screen did not belong to any category Marcus had been given a framework for. They had form. They had organization, structure that implied intention, design that suggested a mind behind it. But the form was wrong in the way that things are wrong when they have been built for conditions so entirely outside human experience that the eye has no existing framework for processing them honestly. Looking at them for more than a few seconds produced a pressure behind the eyes that Marcus recognized as his visual cortex politely, firmly declining to fully commit to what it was receiving. The ancients, the colonel said. They began surfacing 6 weeks ago, 3 years ahead of every model we had built. We do not know what accelerated the timeline. We do not know yet whether they are aware of our existence. What we know is this. When they fully emerge, every threat this planet currently classifies as existential will become background noise in a much larger story. He faced Marcus through the glass with the complete and exhausted seriousness of a man who has spent decades building toward a moment and is now watching it arrive on a schedule he was never given control over. You are the only response we have that the models assign any real probability of success, he said. You can move between their environment and ours. You carry 10,000 years of Naga biological adaptation to subsurface conditions. You carry human cognition, the tactical capacity, the problem solving, the ability to make decisions when pure instinct becomes noise rather than signal. You are the only thing in existence capable of operating in both worlds at once. He paused. You are, without exaggeration, the only chance this planet has of surviving what surfaces next. And if I refuse? Marcus said. The colonel's expression did not shift. He brought up a third screen, a global map, red points pulsing in every major city. More than Vireth had shown him. Significantly more. Cities she had never named because she had never known they had been seeded. Then the people in those cities face what is coming without the one asset that might have made a difference, he said. And Denver will have been the smallest entry in the final chapter of human history. He said it without anger, without any satisfaction, with the flat, unload-bearing exhaustion of a man who has run the same numbers so many times they have stopped feeling like numbers and started feeling like the texture of the world he is trying to save. Marcus walked to the glass. Slowly, he placed one hand flat against it, registering the temperature, the molecular density, the precise character of the material, all of it arriving through new senses with a clarity his previous self would have had no framework to interpret. The cracks that radiated from his palm were perfect, geometric, exact, as if the glass had always contained that pattern and had been waiting for exactly this much pressure applied at exactly this point to finally reveal it. The colonel took one step back, a single involuntary step. The first thing Marcus had seen him do that had not been chosen in advance. Think carefully, the colonel said. His voice was level, but something in its foundation had shifted, not broken, adjusted. You were made to protect this world. Do not become the reason it needs protecting from something else entirely. The cracks spread. The glass bowed inward. Marcus thought about Vireth and her cell. A sovereign reduced to a subject, cables running from a body built for open caverns and 10,000 years of authority. He thought about 7 names pressed into his sternum. Names he had worn as grief and discovered were data. He thought about 6 men in tanks who had existed and died in this program. Without a name, without a mourning that belonged only to them. Without a single choice that had not been part of someone else's design. He thought about the colonel standing one involuntary step back from his own glass, running new calculations in real time, perhaps for the first time in a very long and very certain career. He thought about what it means to be built as a weapon, and then handed the question of what to aim yourself at. He thought about 6 versions of himself who never got to answer that question. He intended to answer it for all of them. Maybe, he said. He felt the new architecture of his mouth, the weight of what it could now do with a smile. What that expression meant now, in this face, with these teeth, carrying the names of 7 men and the memory of 6 who never had names at all. Maybe I'm both. Every folktale ever told, in every language, around every fire, comes down in the end to a single question wearing different clothes. Not who are you? Not what were you made for? Not what do the people who designed you expect you to become. Just this, and always only this. When the moment arrives that is entirely yours, when no hand is on your back steering you, when the choice is genuinely open and the cost of it is real, and the world will be measurably different depending on which direction you face. What do you choose? Marcus Reeves. Prototype, Specimen 7. The 7th attempt at building a bridge between two worlds that had been in opposition since before human memory. Was standing in a room with cracked glass and a man who had built his entire career on the assumption that every variable was under control. And then Marcus was choosing. What he chose, and what it cost him, and what it saved, and what it could not save, belongs to what comes next. You have just heard the second chapter of a story that is only getting deeper. If this episode found you, if it sat with you, if it left questions in your chest that you are still turning over long after the voice has stopped, then you already belong here. This is what Folktale Monarchy is built for. Stories that do not let go, worlds that exist beneath the one you can see. Characters who carry more than they were designed to carry and make choices that the people who designed them never accounted for. Follow the channel so episode 3 reaches you the moment it exists. Like this video so the story finds the people who need it. Leave a comment. Tell us whether you trust Vareth or the Colonel. Tell us what you think Marcus does next. Tell us what you think is waiting in the dark below the Naga. Craster, the best theories from this community have a way of finding their way into where the story goes. And share this with someone who is ready for a story that takes them somewhere they have never been. Episode 3 is already being built. What Marcus discovers about the ancients, and the choice that discovery makes unavoidable, will change everything you understood about this episode and the one before it. We believe, genuinely, that you are going to love it more. The monarchy continues. Stay with us.